Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Game Telecom video we're going to be discussing a series of rumours, very interesting rumours actually, that have popped up on the internet over the past 24 or so hours. They range from Nvidia's successor to Pascal, also known as Volta, its performance, and possibly some information regarding the memory configurations of Volta, especially for the consumer versions, as well as information on AMD's upcoming GPU and CPU architectures. And then we're going to focus squarely on security for both the vulnerability found in Windows, a recent one, and Intel's AMD vulnerability. Yes, we have discussed AMD previously, but a series of updates really puts this into some light and context. We'll go into that in just a moment, and we're going to finish the video on some happy news, and that is Ryzen 5 is doing rather well in the eyes of customers, and is possibly about the most well-received CPU in about a decade. We'll get into that in just a moment though. So first of all, I want to give credit where credit is due, and that is to the folks who actually emailed me this. The first one who did is Meme Rooney. I don't know his real name, or her real name, but anyway, Carbonite.co.za has been fairly active in terms of leaks, and also posted a number of Ryzen rumours which turned out later to be actually fairly accurate. So the user in question on this forum seems to have taken some leaks and rumours which has already been fairly well populated, as well as putting several others that are somewhat less known. So we're going to be taking them with, of course, a grain of salt, because ultimately, until a company makes an announcement, we're not going to go on record and say that they're accurate. But with that said, as I said, Carbonite have had a fairly reasonable track record in the past, and some of these rumours have already been somewhat established before, so there are a couple of new ones here as well. So I figured we can just have kind of a rumour roundup with this. Anyway, with that said, let's jump in. AMD's SP3, for those who do not know what SP3 is, and I kind of wouldn't blame you because it sounds a bit weird. You might be thinking it's service pack for, I don't know, Windows XP or something. It is the socket for Nepals, and according to the rumours, SP3, or Nepals, is incredibly fast with single performance better than normal Ryzen. The LGA platform will require larger coolers, as the CPU is pretty large, unsurprisingly, because obviously the surface area is pretty big because of the sheer number of cores, cache, and other crap that's thrown in with this. Yes, crap is a technical term. Intel, meanwhile, are going to show off a 14-core, 28-thread XE CPU at Computex this year for X299, but it will be available in August. Speaking of actual cool things that are popping up, as of the time I'm recording this, in about 23-ish hours, there's going to be a CEO keynote at GTC from Nvidia. So definitely check back for that if you are interested in graphics technology. And let's face it, graphics technology is probably some of the coolest technology in gaming at the moment. AMD will have a 10, 12, 14 and 16 part for SP3, all quad channel, and it will support DDR4 3200MHz plus. SP3 is seriously expensive, but it is cheaper than what Intel offers on X299. Performance-wise, AMD is the winner with sheer cores and IPC that is technically better than anything Intel has to offer. Basically, you can take that, and this is not what they're saying, this is my personal take on that. It's pretty much saying that, well, AMD just offering more numbers of cores, and clock speed for clock speed, the performance is better. However, Kaby Lake X is an overclocking monster, and even without delidding, every CPU is 5 GHz capable 24/7. Liquid nitrogen, however, is 7 GHz plus. I'm very curious to know if that turns out to reality, because obviously that would mean the 7740K, for example, actually has some serious potential. Because of limitations, Intel has another LGA platform coming out for Coffee Lake, and this is not compatible for Z270, and this LGA platform will house 6 cores, 12 threads for Intel. This platform will be available for September. I'm sure that's going to please everyone, right? We all need more platforms for Intel. Anyway, and there's also going to be a microcode update for Ryzen. This one I think is going to be very pertinent to a lot of folks, because supposedly it will allow additional dividers and multipliers to be selectable with current CPUs. So I just want to rephrase that one more time. It's for current CPUs. So let's say you've already got a Ryzen 5 or a Ryzen 7. This microcode update is going to essentially mean that you're going to be able to select DDR4 speeds up to 4000 megahertz. I don't know if that's true or not. I guess we're going to find out pretty soon. On the GPU side of things, Nvidia is introducing at least 2 Volta parts this year. The first is in September, but there's no information on the second part. The first part, however, and this is quite imperative, the first part shows improved performance /mm, and performance per clock we haven't seen for ages. Basically, they're saying it's almost like the equivalent of Maxwell per clock rather than Pascal. And you're probably going to say, but Paul, that kind of is a bit weird. Pascal had a large performance increase over Maxwell. This is true, but Kepler to Maxwell to then Pascal, if you actually look at it from pure performance per clock, and that's a bit of a loose term, as we all know, because of course it does depend upon what you're doing, resolutions, and God knows what else. But generally speaking, the difference between Maxwell to Pascal, and there are some architecture differences, don't get me wrong, primarily Pascal, as Nvidia themselves said, is built for speed. They basically simply clocked Maxwell to the hilt with Pascal, and they did so by changing some of the way that the cores were put together. Of course, they had new process technology, other bits and bobs, and basically the GPU cores just ran at incredible speeds. But if you look at Kepler to Maxwell, there was a larger difference in the actual architecture. Kind of curious to see whether that is true or not. Vega products are imminent. Been hearing that one for a while, and they are clock for clock faster than anything Nvidia has at the high end. They, supposedly, operate at lower clocks but higher performance. So in other words, and obviously I'm kind of putting this in words in his mouth here, it's possible that a 1500 megahertz Vega part is going to outperform, say, a 17 or 1800 megahertz Pascal part. I personally want to see reality rather than, guesses at this point, but we'll see. Speaking of reality, Nvidia's new parts will offer GDDR6. HBM is reserved for Tesla and compute parts. This is quite curious. One reason I can see this coming as a reality and not just, supposition is because when you think about it from a very technical point of view, HBM2 is expensive. And it does have some limitations when it comes to VRAM. Now, yes, of course, you can go 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes HBM2. No one is disputing that. The problem is, good luck putting that into a customer variant card and having someone actually buy that at high volume. I mean, you can do technically anything. Like, you could, technically, in theory, you could do that, but it's going to be very cost prohibitive. And obviously there's going to be someone probably saying, hey, I'd buy 2 of them. Yeah, that's nice, but your bank account is probably in the very, very small quantity that could actually take that without needing to put out a mortgage on your home. So, I can understand the point of going GDDR6. Obviously you have the potential of lower power consumption with GDDR6, but also higher clock speeds. This means that in theory, with the same width of bus, say 256 or 320 or whatever it ends up being, I'm just pulling off figures out of my ass, we could still see quite a lot of bandwidth, perhaps 400, 500 gigabytes per second, and presumably with Volta there are also going to be various memory compression technologies as well, so in theory it should be adequate. I'll wait and see, however. Moving away from the rumours, let's go instead into vulnerabilities. First of all, Microsoft are offering a fix for I'm sorry, this is just the best name ever, for a crazy bad, not my words, Windows Defender exploit. Now this was reported by Tavis Ormandy, and no, I didn't pronounce Normandy wrong, Ormandy, and I'm definitely going to pronounce this lady's name wrong, Natalie Silvanovich. Really sorry to her, which are 2 Project Zero researchers, and they reported a security hole on Twitter. So this basically means that there's a flaw in Windows Defender, and it leaves people open to remote attacks. So this means that, at least in theory, an attacker could execute arbitrary code and take control of the system. Now this attack can actually occur via the email. Now here's the kicker. You're going to say to yourself, well, gee, I just won't open an email from someone who I don't trust, which is, yes, a very good move. The problem is this can happen even if the email isn't entirely open, supposedly. The patch is going to be available from Windows Update, and it will start appearing on your systems in the next couple of days. And it will happen for Windows 8, 8.1, 10, and Server 2012, and some other OS versions. not ideal. Now, I do want to give an update because a couple of you have actually messaged asking me to cover this and Intel's AMD vulnerability. I will admit, and I'm holding my hands up to this, I am not a security expert. I know a lot more about graphics and CPU technology and other bits and bobs than what I do security and vulnerabilities. I will admit that. However, here we are. So, Intel has a technology known as active management technology. Small business technology and state and standard manageability ISM platforms. So essentially what it is that security researchers have given a warning that there is a remotely exploitable vulnerability in active management technology. And this has been going back about a decade. I just want to repeat that, about 10 years. That is not a short-term thing. That's not like, recent CPUs. And basically, according to Intel, there is already firmware patches which close up this vulnerability. The problem is, well, there's a couple of problems. The first is that hardware vendors themselves need to tailor it to their particular product. So, for example, HP, Lenovo, Dell, whomever, need to tailor it to their obviously specific hardware. So, for example, their particular motherboard with whatever else they've got going on in their system. The other issue is it depends upon end-of-life products. So, for example, let's say you're a pretty old business that handles data. I'm just throwing this out there. Let's say that you're an old business, or let's say you're a small business that handles data, whether internally, like you're, let's say you've got internal servers which are handling data, or perhaps you are doing the reverse and maybe you're managing it for a customer. Well, in which case, in theory, you might have hardware which is basically end of life because it's adequate for what your needs are, but at the same time, it's not exactly shining with the brightest of stars. Now, the theory is that this hardware will remain vulnerable, and you'll be absolutely shocked, appalled, surprised, and possibly petrified at the number of companies that operate with skeleton staff IT, even in SMEs, like small to medium enterprises, that basically their security staff just pretty much do the regular updates, run a quick virus scan, and that's about it. I have done some contracting with that in the past. It's not great. I stopped doing it because, quite frankly, it's a nightmare. And anyone who works in that type of industry, they could probably regale you with some tales. But anyway, I don't want to get into that too much. So there is a vulnerability scanner. The problem is, this to me is not great. Now, I just want to clarify, this is not for you and I. So let's say, for the sake of argument, you've got a Haswell CPU, which certainly falls within the time span. Or perhaps you own Skylake, which is obviously a more newer processor. You're fine. You probably do not need to worry. The issue isn't necessarily you. I'm more concerned about it from a data exploit point of view, because obviously this type of thing is essentially a way of actually running very nasty code. And the amount of users, or rather the amount of people who are being affected by this, is probably small. And obviously HP and whomever else are definitely going to be trying to put this together. But, I don't really know how to take this. Like, I don't blame Intel because obviously it wasn't... Okay, I blame them they didn't spot it, but at the same time, I can't really be super, mad at them, because at the end of the day, if I was mad at them, I'm pretty sure that if you go back in the history, almost every single company, I mean, Google have had issues. Don't even get me started on some of the other companies out there. So, unfortunately, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. The biggest issue I have is, of course, what's it going to mean for us as customers, and that's really my concern. So, I guess normal stuff. Just, be vigilant, if I can get the bloody word out. Anyway, I just want to go into a couple of very small... Well, one actually very small rumour before I finish off, and that is there is talk, and this is thanks to a Power Color invitation at Computex Tapai. This is, by the way, taking place, just for those who don't know, between May the 30th and June the 2nd. And Power Color, this is verbatim quote, Power Color cordially, I like that word by the way, welcomes you to visit our meeting rooms number 622 at Computex Tapai 2017. We will display our unique Red Devil series products, new technologies and other latest products. It would be a great pleasure to meet you at the exhibition for future information or blah 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 blah. That part's not really pertinent. The most important thing, however, is that this does add further discussion to the fact that we possibly might be seeing Vega unveiled at some description by board partners at Computex. The reason perhaps people are taking that is because new technologies, maybe, I don't know. It's a bit arbitrary. Let's face it, we do have the vague Q2 comment from AMD, and that's according to their CEO and other top executives. So, I mean, that's pretty much cutting it close. So, we'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, that wasn't really the purpose of extending this video. There was one other small little caveat, and that is a survey which was conducted by 3D Center. Now, essentially, according to the survey, Ryzen 5 is the best received product launch since they started these surveys back in 2010. So that's well, it's about 7 years, right? 84%, god damn it, 84% of individuals polled had a positive view of Ryzen 5. 6.7 had a negative, while obviously the remainder, which is about 17.5, held an indifferent opinion. This is much better than Kaby Lake, because, yeah, Kaby Lake not so much with the good. 12% of people had a positive outlook on Kaby Lake. 45% were like, meh. In other words, indifferent. Meanwhile, almost 43% had a negative view on Kaby Lake. I'm probably going to go out on a limb and say that the recent overclocking shenanigans, more specifically from Intel, saying, well, gee, if you don't want your processor to overheat, here's a tip, don't overclock. Okay, how about you use decent quality TIM then, Intel? No? Okay, well, screw you as well then. Oh dear, you got it, yeah, just, yeah. That's actually really impressive. And here's one that triggered me, and that is that Sandy Bridge actually did not have as a positive reception and that Sandy Bridge, to my opinion anyway, is possibly one of the best value CPUs you could possibly have bought. I mean, I know people with a 2500K at launch who still have not really needed an upgrade if they've had a good overclock. I mean, let's, for the sake of argument, say you had a 2600K and you had a really decent overclock. Let's say you got to the mid 4 point whatever, 4.5 for example, and you had decent RAM, a decent motherboard platform, and gaming is your primary concern. I'm going to go out on the limb and say you're probably going to be good for at least this year. That is ridiculous given the release date. I think it was like, what, early 2011? Maybe like, I don't know, January to February? Maybe March at the latest, but I'm pretty sure it was around January, February time that I bought my CPU. My original one was a 2500K, and bloody hell, that thing was ridiculous. Even coming from a Q6600. I mean, the Q6600 was a really nice processor, but the 2500K just ruffle stomped it. I did have one slight regret. I wish I did go with the 2600K, because shortly afterwards, ironically, I started to do a lot of video production. Well, I'll say shortly after, it was about a year afterwards. But anyway, I'm getting way off the beaten path. I'm actually really happy with that, because that means that Intel obviously are taking note of that. They're thinking to themselves, well, gee, you know, Ryzen is obviously being pretty well received, and that's good for us. The only problem with Ryzen 5, my opinion, and I said that in our review, by the way, of the 1600X, is that the price point is a little too close to the 1700, the Ryzen 7 1700. Admittedly, the 1600X does have a slightly higher clock speed, but since, as we all know, clock speed doesn't really mean too much with Ryzen, because essentially all silicon, give or take maybe 100 or 200 megahertz, can clock within about the same clock speed of each other. Wow, that was a really messy sentence. It doesn't really make that much difference. So, in my personal opinion, the Ryzen 7 1700 and possibly the 1600X are maybe two of the best value CPUs. And honestly, I wouldn't go as far as to say they render the i5s, for example, the 7600s, as obsolete or anything like that. I think that's way too strongly worded. But I would go as far as to say in certain scenarios, you don't really want to buy a Kaby Lake processor. That's just my opinion. and obviously your mileage will vary, my friend. Anyway, this video turned out a bit longer than what I'd originally hoped for. Sorry about that. But, yeah. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.